What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Mining Pod. For this week's show, we've got for y'all an exclusive with Auradine's CSO, Sanjay Gupta, to talk about their newest Bitcoin miner, the Teraflux AH3880, which is a hydro-cooled U2 server rack form factor ASIC miner. Really interesting development. We saw last year Bitmain release its first server rack form factor miner, the U321EXPH. And it seems like this idea is catching fire after a bunch of miners have come to Auradine asking for a similar form factor for their most recent miner. So this miner is currently being shipped. They developed it over the past few months. And I talked with Sanjay about a number of the considerations for why they decided to move in this direction and what we should expect for them over the next few quarters. Now, as a little bit of background, Auradine burst onto the scene in 2022 with the Herculean task of disrupting the ASIC miner duopoly held by Bitmain and MicroBT. Since then, they have shipped a number of units that miners have been pretty happy with considering they're a newcomer. And we talk a little bit about some of the things that Auradine has had to do in order to secure that market position, because it's hard enough to get the ASIC allocation from a top tier chip manufacturer like TSMC. It's another thing entirely to scale up your operations and your manufacturing capacity to the point that you can compete with the big boys. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. Hope y'all enjoy the show.
Hey, this is Will with Blockspace. Did you know that we're selling BitAxe Bitcoin miners now on miningpod.shop? If you're interested in having a BitAxe sit on your desk, or maybe you want to orange pill a friend or a family member, go to miningpod.shop to get industry-leading pricing on BitAxe units. If you want to buy them for your company, maybe as a holiday party gift or something else, feel free to reach out to us at hello@blockspace.media to order custom bulk amount for a discount. Again, that's miningpod.shop to order a BitAxe today.
Are you a retail or institutional investor interested in Bitcoin mining companies? The Miner Mag brings you free data and analysis from all major NASDAQ-listed Bitcoin mining operations to know who stands out. Check out visualized metrics and data-dependent stories at theminermag.com.
Today's show is brought to you by Digital Shovel. Digital Shovel is a leading manufacturer of modular mining pods as well as PDUs and switchgears. Unlike many other competitors, their product is designed and manufactured in North America with a complete UL inspection on the entire unit, not just individual components. Additionally, Digital Shovel is one of the most vertically integrated manufacturers of over 75,000 square feet of sheet metal shop, SMT and wave solder PCB assembly, as well as final assembly all under one roof in Toronto, Canada. Their price point leads the industry when compared to products with rates as low as $69,000 per megawatt for a complete data center with smart PDUs and switchgears. To learn more, visit digitalshovel.com. Sanjay Gupta, welcome to the Mining Pod, sir. How you doing?
Good. Thanks a lot, Colin. It's always great to connect with you. So very much appreciate this.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on. Really big news coming out for y'all and excited to cover it here on the Mining Pod and give our listeners a glimpse into some of the products you'll have coming down the pipe. So we'll be focusing for a lot of this conversation on this new ASIC miner y'all have coming out, the Auradine Teraflux AH3880. We'll just be calling it the AH for shorthand in this for brevity's sake. The miner is a traditional server rack. It's a U2 form factor and has a pretty impressive power density or hash rate density of 600 terahashes a second, can achieve 16.5 joules per terahash on the upper bound and 14.5 joules per terahash on the lower bound. So with that brief introduction, could you tell us a little bit more about this model and what led y'all to develop it?
No, sure, Colin. So we're, again, very excited about bringing this to marketplace. As you mentioned, it's a high density from a terahash perspective form factor. So within 2U, we're packing 600 terahash, which is quite unprecedented. We based that upon a lot of feedback that we got from our miner customers that we've been listening to over the past good number of months. We already have an existing range of air-cooled miners and immersion-cooled miners. And several of the significant customers were also wanting to put into place hydro-cooled miners to complete the full, what we call trifecta of our product offering. It works well with their infrastructure. We also got feedback on a few different dimensions. We got feedback on the form factor, where they wanted a rack, a U form factor. So we incorporated that in this 2U form factor. We got feedback on the density and the fact that there is infrastructure costs And so therefore having a higher hash rate density improves the infrastructure cost for the different miners, and therefore improves total cost of ownership. We got ongoing feedback on different elements, right, around. So we've actually got a display for the miner. We're building a number of quality factors to the miner that we've got feedback. We want to be sure that we can provide the best total cost of ownership to our miner customers is the intent, right? So this really was a culmination of a lot of feedback we got from the marketplace and a lot of engineering work that we've been put into place in the past good number of months.
So with regards to that feedback from your miners, this is something we've seen increasingly, I think, as the ASIC market landscape becomes more competitive. Bitmain and MicroBT as well, working with some of their privileged customers to really take in their feedback for what they want to see for future models. What was it specifically about the Hydro form factor that miners were pushing for? Why are they leaning towards this more than immersion? Because this has been a reoccurring theme as we see miners become more sophisticated in their operations. The savvy ones seem to be trying to move towards superior forms of cooling in the form of immersion or liquid, and it's still highly contested, which they seem to think is better. Now, it would indicate to me that Auradine's most recent ASIC, as well as Bitmain's U321EXPH, that this hydro cooling model is starting to win out in some ways. So what specifically were you hearing from miners with regards to that, and why did y'all decide to move towards hydro?
No, sure. And I wouldn't say that it's either or. It's not that the market is saying that we definitely want to go to all hydro versus immersion or versus air cooled. There have been different customer segments that have had different needs, right? So some customers have actually dealt with immersion cooling for a long period of time. They have the infrastructure in place with respect to the containers, the tanks, and they have experience with the immersion fluids. There's other miners that are actually building out their infrastructure now. And previously, they had concerns around the existing hydro miners in the marketplace. They had issues around leakage of hydro. And as you can imagine, if you have quality issues or leakage in a hydro unit, it creates a number of challenges for the miner. So their opportunity that they had indicated is that they were looking for a quality hydro-based miner where they don't need the infrastructure and other aspects of immersion cooling, including the liquid, if they're not that comfortable with it, or they don't want to make those infrastructure investments. But at the same time, they said that, they want to minimize their infrastructure costs around hydro and ensure that the quality of this hydro miner is top-notch. Because, any shortcuts to that, where they've had some bad experiences in the past, they said, we want to overcome. So we've been working with the miners even throughout the design process. It's not just we're launching this in the marketplace. We're launching it right now, but we've been in active discussion even through the design with a few of our key customers who are technologically quite sophisticated and provided us a lot of feedback on the type of quality, the type of aspects, the type of controls they actually want for this particular miner. So we think that this will be a strong supplement and an add to it. But it's not necessary to say that, there's some miners that immersion works great, and there's some miners that air-cooled mining, continues to work great for them.
Yeah, and for some of our listeners who might not have as much history or background on the development of these systems, if you look at prior hydro-cooled miners, they look almost identical form factor-wise to the shoeboxes we've seen on the air-cooled. They just have some pipes that go in and circulate water through them, but they're single units. And with that comes obviously complications with deployment and with repairs and with anything that you have to do in terms of maintenance. And these new form factors are more traditional server rack form factors, correct? The U2 form factor. It's what you might see in a traditional data center that is liquid cooled. And is a lot of the feedback you're getting from the miners who ask for this that are trying to move towards that more traditional form factor?
Yeah, it's also interesting, Colin, because we've been in the market for the past few years, and a number of people in our company have had very deep expertise in telecom, cybersecurity, just quality infrastructure for that. So as we entered the Bitcoin market, the shoebox factor was something that was in place, but it doesn't have the best form when it comes to density in a data center, especially if you're deploying lots and lots of these machines. It doesn't provide the compatibility if people are also looking at HPC compute versus Bitcoin mining compute and some interoperability within that. So when we started off with Auradine, our first form factor, we got feedback that please don't change the form factor that's there in the marketplace. So we came back with our shoebox design. But overall, there's a number of benefits of going to the traditional form factor because that's used extensively in the telecom industry. It's used extensively in cybersecurity. It's being used for AI data centers. It's easy to adjust. It's got a high density to it. The infrastructure, you have pipes coming in and out for the cooling, is actually something that can be well designed. So we brought all of those elements into this particular form factor, and we think that this actually will work well. This are traditional U-based, industry standard-based rack design for the Hydra unit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to share my screen really quickly, just for an illustrative thing for some of our listeners and viewers on YouTube. So if you're on the podcast platform, apologies, you won't be able to see this, but you can hop onto our YouTube to check it out if you would like to see. This is the traditional hydro-cooled form factor that we've been talking about. And as you can see, it's just the shoebox basically, and it's a single unit. And if we hop on over to a hydro cooling system for traditional server racks, let me get one up really quickly. And this will not be necessarily what y'all's looks like, obviously, but you can see right here that it's a more traditional server rack system and is more tuned towards kind of larger scale operations and things like that. So this is something that I think that miners have been asking for a while from what I've heard. And it is probably one of the more exciting developments in terms of the shifting ASIC landscape that we're seeing right now, because, I would personally be surprised if in 10 or 20 years, the majority of mines were running on these older form factors like the shoe boxes with air cooled and things like that.
Agreed.
So just kind of moving on to some of the more nitty gritty about this, I'm going to ask you some questions that you may have to defer on because I know y'all have operational considerations, but what should we expect from Auradine's output for this model? What allocation will Auradine place on its manufacturing capacity for something like this? You can give a rough figure, percentage, dollar amount, hash rate. What should we be looking at in terms of production capacity?
Yeah, no, sure. So I'll take a step back, Colin. As we, even over the past, good number of months, our whole take has been that, ensuring that there's strong execution at every aspect of the supply chain is critical. It's not just good to design a good miner. We have to ensure that the production, the capacity is robust. So we've been spending time on every aspect of the supply chain. And that includes that we have got dual sourcing on every aspect of the supply chain. We've got some quality contract manufacturers that we're building capacity for. We've got geographical diversification across that. And we have that at every single step. So right now, we've actually been ramping up where we're in the thousands of units per week where we have capacity. We've also got redundancy in that capacity across more than one supplier and more than one location. So from an overall ability to supply machines to the marketplace, whether you measure it by number of units or measure it in terms of exahash or terahash, we actually feel that we can meet the demand of the marketplace very, very successfully. So we're talking about, thousands of units per week that were already in the manufacturing capacity and shipping out, already. And the same thing we've actually done in terms of qualifying our supply chain and manufacturing based on the Hydro units as well. In the case of Hydro, there is additional complexities when it comes to the manufacturing because we ensure that these are rigorously tested. And imagine, we need to ensure that we're testing it for water-based circulation, and we want to be sure that that is set up even as we're developing the different components of this. So we've also got that into place with our manufacturers and ensuring that we're actually testing this at the individual group level or sub-block level and then the full system level before we actually ship this out. So to your overall question, Colin, we've got adequate capacity. We have redundancy in the capacity. And we have the ability to ship, thousands of miners of these every week.
Big players in Bitcoin mining demand stability, regulation, and trust. That's why NiceHash has moved its headquarters to Switzerland, a country known for its strong regulatory framework and for keeping its cheese locked in a safe. As one of the most regulated mining platforms in the industry, NiceHash provides institutional miners with a secure, compliant, and transparent solution to manage and maximize their mining output, delivering the reliability and performance expected from the best mining tools, along with firmware, monitoring software, and other essential mining tools. Contact a NiceHash representative today to learn why the top Bitcoin miners are making the switch to NiceHash. You can find out more info in today's show notes. And when you contact them, let them know the Mining Pod sent you.
I want to put a pin on the supply chain consideration because it leads into my next question. But just zooming in on this a little bit further, what percentage or ratio of Auradine's ASIC should we expect to be these hydro-cooled in the future? Would we expect a 50-50 split? Is it kind of based on market demand?
Yeah, Colin. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this would be based upon market demand, right? So there is still a very large installed base of air-cooled miners in the marketplace. And we're seeing an increasing shift of air-cooled to other form factors. And that includes both immersion as well as we'd expect hydro. So the initial feedback we've got and initial anchor customers we've got, we're seeing some very strong demand for hydro. I think it'll still take some time before the air-cooled demand transitions more and more towards hydro as well as potentially immersion. But we are seeing, at least we expect a fairly significant proportion of our ongoing shipments to be in this form factor of hydro. So whether that's going to be 10, 20, 30, 40, I mean, that is still to be seen, but it is expected to be significant. And we're getting some very strong feedback and demand already. And then we'll be expecting, and of course, talking to more customers over the coming weeks and months in terms of further demand for hydro.
Makes sense. So back to the supply chain issue, I'm recalling our conversation, I don't know, maybe 5 months ago at this point for the article that I wrote for Bitcoin Magazine's print edition that's forthcoming. And we were talking about the complexities of getting an ASIC manufacturing business off the ground. The biggest one that I think that comes to people's minds initially is just getting the tape out for the chips from a good foundry like TSMC. But that's really only not even half the battle. You could even say that's a quarter of the battle, because then you obviously have to build up anchor clients. You have to build up robust supply chains. And we've seen a lot of ASIC manufacturers come and go, not because their machines were poor in quality, but because they just couldn't scale up enough to eventually be able to ship to these businesses that are used to buying, tens of millions to hundreds of millions in some cases of these units on a given order. And with regards to that supply chain, you already mentioned redundancies, and at 1,000 units per week, Auradine's clearly ramping up their capacity. But I had another question looking specifically at manufacturing capacity and capabilities with regards to geographic distribution, which you also mentioned. In the press release, Auradine mentions that this new model will address the vulnerabilities of export restrictions, kind of specifically leaning on the fact that Auradine expects this model to be more robust and have a longer shelf life than some of the hydro miners that have come before it. Are there any considerations to try to onshore fabrication of Auradine's ASICs in the US? Is that already happening? This is obviously top of mind given a lot of the looming tariff threats that we've seen coming out of the current Trump administration.
Yeah, so Colin, I think you're bringing up an extremely important point around global diversification, geopolitical risks, and the like. So, just take a step back, right? For some of your listeners and viewers who may not be, fully familiar, Auradine, we are a high technology company based in the heart of Silicon Valley in California. And we have our team, which is based here. We are US designed, fully in this. And we think it's the intellectual property, is critical in terms of the design of the semiconductor chips, the full system, the software stack that we actually do on top of that. There are already US sanctions on access to sensitive semiconductor technology that applies in particular to to companies based out of China. And that is one thing which that the administration is increasingly taking cognizance of. There's a well-publicized case in the telecom industry outside of Bitcoin mining of Huawei, which was banned and put on the restricted list of the US some years ago because of access to sensitive semiconductor technology. And what we actually employ for the case of Bitcoin mining in the form of ASICs is actual cutting-edge technology. In fact, a lot of people are not fully aware, but for instance, the latest Apple iPhones are using a technology which is called 3 nanometer based ASIC. It's the size of the transistors that are there in a particular chip. The machines that we design are using that same latest 3 nanometer based technology. It's the latest in the world that we've actually got. And that has also got, you can say, applications potentially in areas outside of Bitcoin mining, that level of it. So there's sensitivity around that. And ensuring that, there's a strong base in the US, I think is a critical element of that. There's existing tariffs on imports from Chinese companies, and we'll see as to how that progresses. So for any company which is looking for any managing risks when it comes to supply chain shocks, we think that not just us but other companies, if they're based or designed in the US, is a good alternative to that. From our perspective, our technology for the ASIC chip design that is fabricated, in this case by TSMC, it's fully compatible with any of the units that TSMC is going to put in the US as well, where there's been public announcements and there's ongoing factories that are coming up. So we've diversified in that particular way. We have the ability to actually get the final assembly done in the US. We do it in different parts around the world, but all of the intellectual property is all done within the company in Auradine, which is based in the US.
And perhaps there's not the same threat of sanctions on some of the factories that Auradine could be using. I don't know where y'all do assembly, but I know Bitmain does a lot of theirs in Malaysia, some in Indonesia. And they did that in part because they wanted to escape tariffs from Trump's last administration. I don't know what the exact year was. I believe it was around 2017, perhaps, when those were instituted, and a lot of the manufacturing shifted to those other areas. But it sounds like to me, one of the things that you're pointing out here is that there is less jurisdictional risk also when you factor in just US-based intellectual property and the fact that a US company is behind designing the chip. This has obviously been forefront of some Bitcoin miners' minds, as we've seen some trouble bubbling up with SoftGo, because they were allegedly using chips, or their chips ended up, SoftGo is a Chinese ASIC chip company, and they had some of their chips end up in Huawei devices in direct violation of those US sanctions, and they've come under scrutiny from US agencies as a result. Now, the reason this is germane to Bitcoin miners is because SoftGo shares a CEO in McCree Zan with Bitmain, and also Bitmain uses some of SoftGo's chips in their control boards. Now, those aren't Bitmain's control boards, but they are control boards that Bitmain uses for their specific miners. They don't design them, but they source them from a number of different companies. So all of that kind of long prelude to ask this next question. How much has Auradine being a US-based company been a selling point to some of these publicly traded miners who really want to de-risk their relationships with actors overseas that the US government might not be favorable towards?
No, sure, Colin. So first and foremost, we compete and will continue to compete upon performance, quality, customer support, total cost of ownership. If you are a miner, we always are focusing upon that. We always want to win based upon that. Now, in addition to that, there is a notion about the realities of today's global economy and global supply chain risks, as well as the very clearly stated goal of the current administration about an America First policy. There's also risks to the American ecosystem when it comes to sensitive technology, when it comes to miners from outside of the US connected to the electrical grid. Those are known risks. So that is an added point that we think a number of miners do take into consideration in our discussion we have with them, and they probably should. I mean, I've been on the other side. I've been in very large publicly listed companies where I would have considerations. I would want to buy based upon performance. But at the same time, there's genuine geopolitical risk, there's diversification, there's supporting technology, which is, here in the US, which is important as well. So that is something which, we think that a number of miners are taking into consideration, and they're increasingly taking that into consideration. But at the same time, as savvy business people, they look at the total cost of operations, the profitability, the performance of the machines, and then they say, in addition to that, having a US-based, US design system and something which also addresses potential risks from a supply chain perspective is something which actually plays well into the discussion we're having with them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think we've seen a number of moves within publicly listed miners in the US trying to de-risk those jurisdictional considerations. The one that I'm thinking of right now is Bitfarms. They just secured their acquisition of Stronghold on Monday, I believe it was, or I think it was Tuesday morning, actually. And one of the things they highlighted in that press release is now that 80% of their hash rate will be in the US versus 20% in Argentina now, and that they've sold their Paraguay site to Hive. And when we were reporting that story originally, we heard from a number of different sources who are active in the industry that it's a little bit easier for some of these miners to access capital if they can show that the majority of their business doesn't rely on foreign jurisdictions or foreign companies. So I'm sure that also plays a consideration as well when it comes to their ASIC manufacturing partners. Another question, just with regards to Auradine's press release, it mentions, and I have the quote in front of me, that there's over 250 million in bookings and a robust order pipeline exceeding 500 million for Auradine ASICs. Could you break down some of those numbers for us? Is that 250 million pre-orders and the 500 million is soft commits? Like, how can we make sense of those numbers?
No, sure. So first of all, taking a step back, we're a company that is just around 3 years old. So, and I remember, when we started off, in addition to the China-based companies, there is a number, probably 6 or 7 other companies in the marketplace at the time. And all of them have fallen by the wayside because I think to one of the earlier points you're making, designing these cutting-edge ASIC semiconductor chips, perfecting the supply chain, ensuring the manufacturing ramp, ensuring customer support is in place is not an easy task. So we're the only ones that are left standing and actually shipping in any significant quantities from that group or cohort that was there just a few years ago. Now, within this, designing a chip takes a fair amount of time. Designing the supply chain, it actually takes. So we've actually come to market very, very fast. And we came to revenue very quickly. We've then been ramping up very quickly. So the numbers we've indicating out there, the 250 million, those are firm orders that we've been shipping against, and we still have some future shipments too. So we actually got advanced payments, we're actually shipping against it. The 500 million number, or over 500 million, those are ones where we're in active discussions with customers, and we're expecting to get firm purchase orders in the very near future. So those are the two numbers. Both are big numbers, and we're expecting that to continue to ramp and grow as we continue the business.
So are the majority of those publicly traded miners? Obviously, Marathon probably has a big chunk of those orders. They are a investor in Auradine. I know they've been working with you all very closely on some of these designs and giving you feedback accordingly. How much of those are split between public and private?
Sure. So maybe taking a step back, our focus at Auradine, we are focused upon the enterprise Bitcoin miners. So we're not in the retail market directly. So we don't sell on Amazon or other channels. We're focusing upon a select number of significant enterprise data center scale miners. We've got a fairly large and extensive customer base. So we've already actually shipped to well over 40 significant miners. And our intent is that we'll actually give white glove treatment to every single miner that we're actually working with in that overall cohort. Currently, it's actually been quite a mix between privately held and publicly traded miners. So I won't give that, just from a confidentiality point of view, calling that exact breakdown and with names and all that, as you can imagine. But we've actually had a mix between that. I just came back from one of our very major customers in somewhere around the middle of the country. They have a large deployment from us. They're privately held, and they've got a tremendous energy infrastructure, tremendous campus, and they're looking to grow very substantially, and it's privately held. There's other miners that we've actually been shipping to that are among the the top publicly listed miners that you're mentioning or people are well aware of. And then, of course, like you mentioned, Marathon, of course, is a tremendous partner and customer that we're continuing to grow with.
In the competitive world of Bitcoin mining, one name stands out: CleanSpark, America's Bitcoin miner. At CleanSpark, efficiency isn't just a goal, it's our standard. Our sophisticated facilities are built and led by expert teams who care about Bitcoin and the communities we work in. Scale, we've mastered it. Our large-scale operations have set us apart in the industry as examples of community-oriented building. Our track record speaks for itself. We navigate the complexities of the new economy with precision and with skill, continuously achieving operational milestones. Curious about how we do it? We invite you to discover the story behind CleanSpark's success at cleanspark.com.
So shifting back to the hydro-cooled miner, specifically the U2 server rack form factor, when we were covering Bitmain's U3 21EXPH, some months ago, one of the things that was mentioned to us when we interviewed Hut 8 about it, because they partnered with Bitmain for this, is that one of the things that they looked at with regards to their partnership and wanting to lean into this form factor was it gives them more flexibility on the infrastructure front to potentially support other forms of compute. The idea here being that you can create infrastructure that will serve both a traditional server rack for any number of cloud computing or HPC data loads, but you can also have that same server rack, be accommodated for Bitcoin mining. Because you're using the same cooling apparatus, the electrical infrastructure is more or less the same. And the only thing that really might differ is the networking infrastructure, which they can figure out on the back end. How many of your clients or partners have mentioned that is an appealing aspect of this for them? Because we've seen a lot of Bitcoin miners lean into HPC and AI. And I'm just wondering how many of them have it in the back of their mind that this gives them the ability to maybe have forays into that, spend hundreds of millions of dollars on CapEx that they don't then just have to completely scrap because they're deciding to take another approach.
No, and I think, Colin, that's a great point. So, at Auradine, we, being a technology company, we've actually got two business lines. So we have the Bitcoin mining and blockchain, you can say, line is one. And then actually our second business line is around AI. And it's the infrastructure for AI, particularly to do with high-speed networking and full solutions for AI data centers. And on the AI world, it's also been, it's an interesting evolution. You used to have historically data centers which are focused upon telecom, 25, 30 years ago. And then they moved to cloud compute. And when they moved to cloud compute, they actually went to, like, in the order of magnitude in one rack, you can have around 10 to 20 kilowatts of power. Right? In fact, in a number of cases, it's actually sub 10 kilowatts of power. If you look at the AI data centers of today, if you take an NVIDIA rack, which has 72 GPUs and NVIDIA's 72 rack, you're talking about upwards of 100 kilowatts of power in one rack. And that needs to be cooled. It needs to be installed. It needs to be cooled. And we're seeing that there's an interesting crossover between Bitcoin technology and AI data center technology. So the whole area around this liquid cooling, hydro cooling, which we're bringing to bear for Bitcoin mining, is extremely relevant for AI data centers as well. A number of customers that we're also in discussions with, and like you're mentioning, Colin, are looking at a joint strategy between AI or HPC and Bitcoin mining. So the U form factor works well with that. The cooling technologies that we're deploying out here, work well with that. And then some of the load balancing. So some of the technology that we have, which is very unique, we have a technology called Energy Tune, where you can adjust the output of the miner and the entire fleet of miners up or down. So if you're using 10 kilowatts or 10 megawatts or 15 megawatts, you want to bring it down to half of that, and you want to do it within seconds, we have a technology that allows you to do it without rebooting the machines. And a number of, again, customers are also looking at balancing. So if you're running an AI data center and you're running it, let's say at 100 megawatts, it doesn't consume 100 megawatts all the time. And there's an ability to use a Bitcoin mining center, which is adjacent to it, to adjust the load between that AI data center. So there's another commonality. So all in all, we think that there's there's an opportunity for a number of customers that are in the Bitcoin mining area, which have access to power contracts, long-term contracts, they have infrastructure, and they're getting in the AI HPC space that, these technologies related to the U form factor, related to hydro or liquid cooling, besides immersion cooling, could be quite relevant.
So there's a really kind of a trifecta going on here between the U2 form factor, hydro-cooled ASIC miner, Auradine's AI and HPC infrastructure business, and also the firmware that allows for auto-tuning the power draw without shutting down the machine entirely. So should we expect to see Auradine maybe working with some of these miners in the future to implement these workloads in tandem?
We would expect so, Colin. I mean, again, we're already in discussion with several fairly large miners that have got, interest in both Bitcoin mining and AI data centers. We also expect that there's going to be an increasing need for what is called edge AI data centers, where you bring more and more of training and inference, actually particularly inference, to closer to different use cases and use applications. And we actually expect that the technology that we've already got and are perfecting on the Bitcoin mining side would be relevant to any customer also looking for an AI data center, either independently or in conjunction with the Bitcoin mining data center.
Fantastic. Before we close out with a few kind of questions to round out the conversation, I'd like to dive in a little bit more into the actual mechanism or specifications for the U2. So in terms of cooling, is this closed loop, and how does the system actually operate to make sure that the miners don't overheat?
No, sure. So what we do in all of our systems, including this, is that we are able to monitor every chip on the hashboard. And we monitor it for voltage, we monitor it for power, we monitor frequency, and we also monitor it for temperature. So we look at, if any particular chip is heating, is it overheating, then we actually throttle it down. We have a unique technology called dynamic voltage and frequency scaling that we actually use to ensure that it's, think about it like an intelligent algorithm that can actually optimize the performance of every chip on the hashboard. So that we'll continue to do, and we actually brought to bear in this particular miner as well. Within that, we have the ability to, it's called auto temperature protection that we actually do on the individual chips on the hashboard, where if any particular chip is overheating, we actually throttle it back, that one particular chip back down, to ensure that it doesn't impact or doesn't burn out. In addition to that, we've actually implemented what we call, there's some very unique technology, which we call smart hashboard technology, where even though there should be no chip that fails on the hashboard, in case a chip or multiple chips fail on a hashboard, in other miners, it brings the hashboard and the miner down. In our case, we've actually got a unique architecture where even if multiple chips fail on a hashboard, the board will continue to hash at nearly the same level. And that is some unique, what we call bus architecture that we actually use in these miners to be able to allow that, providing that smart hashboard technology as well. So there's a number of elements that we actually built in. We've also got specific sensors where we look for, in case there's any leakage of the hydro side, we get an immediate alert on that. That's been a factor that a number of miners had asked for as well. So we brought in a number of aspects around quality, around sensing it, automatic intelligent systems that adjust the hash rate and optimize the hash rate. And then we have things which are in this closed loop system, which allow that in case there's any issues that are taking place, we monitor it, immediately and give an alert to the miner, for that. But your earlier question, it is a closed loop system, and it connects into to overall cooling. It's basically water coming in, it's circulating through a liquid plate, cooling down the chips, cooling down the power supply unit, and then going out and then coming back, after getting cooled, back in a closed loop circulating system.
So when you're designing these systems and you're working on all of these technologies and, kind of like firmware considerations for monitoring, and also just designing the cooling system in general, making sure that everything is operating correctly, making sure that it doesn't leak, making sure that the miner is not overheating. roughly how long does that troubleshooting and testing process take? And is it as simple as you go to a partner like Marathon, perhaps, you give them some demo machines and you let them run it? Because I'm trying to wrap my mind around how you pilot something like this, because it's not as easy as just taking a shoebox miner and plugging it in and you can monitor it, right? Like you need specific infrastructure. You need to be able to have the cooling towers. You need to be able to have all of the server rack infrastructure in place so that you can test something like this. What does the testing process look like? And roughly how long does that usually take for a new model like this, especially one that's a new form factor?
No, sure, Colin. So we are, as it's again mentioned that we're a technology company. And we have people who've actually brought some very, very sophisticated technology to market in other industries, over the past good number of years. We have rigorous testing that we do, first of all, in-house. So we have a lab. In fact, if any point in time, Colin, you actually want to come and visit, or you want to have, one of your you can say key listeners want to come across and, visit, we actually do that on a for key miners. We actually bring them and we show them around our lab and our offices, but we've actually got extensive laboratory and testing that we actually do within the company itself. So that's one. The second is then, we work with our key customers for ensuring that we can actually implement some of these tests in the field. And we're getting feedback from that in the field itself over a period of time. And then thirdly, even outside of that, even as we're going through the design phase, we've actually been getting input from our select mining partners and customers to ensure that we're not just coming up with the product and springing it upon them, but they're actually involved in giving us feedback even during that design process. Right? But overall, we've actually done this over many months of development, of testing. We have a very strong product team. We have engineers in the company that are specialists in thermal design. We have specialist engineers in the form of mechanical design that are there in the company. We have specialists in the form of hashboard design. So, we do a lot of that rigorous testing. We take that very, very seriously. And that is one of the things that, in fact, when we came into the Bitcoin mining market, we heard a lot of issues around terms that we'd never heard about, dead on arrivals, DOAs, or failure rates within the first 30, 60 days. We were somewhat astonished, to be honest, Colin, by the level of DOAs and the level of returns. Because in other industries like telecom, cybersecurity, you don't have failure rates of that type. And we are designing then, when we came to market, we wanted to ensure that our Bitcoin mining hardware is in that similar type that mimics other industries where you have, virtually no DOAs and very, very few failures in the field, even over an extensive, period of time.
Would definitely love to see that testing facility at some point. It sounds like an interesting place and a place for some ripe observations about the nitty gritty of all this stuff. So, absolutely. One last question to close out everything, and not to discount the launch because it's very interesting and I'm really excited to see it in the field. I'm curious what else Auradine might have coming down the pipe for 2025 and into 2026. Y'all do not seem like a company that is, want to rest on your laurels. And I know you're constantly developing things. So what are some of the things that Auradine's eyeing or would like to tackle over the coming quarters as y'all continue to expand your business?
No, sure. So we want to be at the forefront of technology infrastructure pertaining to blockchain and AI. You can expect that we'll continue to push the frontiers of technology on Bitcoin mining to ensure that we continue to get the best energy efficiency, the best performance, best elements of energy tune and demand response and interaction of that, rugged features which allow deployment in harsh conditions. So we're going to continue to push the boundaries on that. And then, like I was mentioning briefly, we're coming up with the whole AI infrastructure area and ultra high-speed networking. The analogy I give is that if you think about, there's a lot of buzz around GPUs that people have heard about, NVIDIA GPUs and other GPUs in the marketplace, or AI accelerators for compute. If you think about those are the cars, we are building the highways around the cars and the full infrastructure. So, having a fast car is not good if you don't have the ultra high-speed highways to actually, run that on. So you could expect that you'll be seeing some of those ultra high-speed highways along with the high-speed cars, packaged together that we'll be bringing to market as well in the coming months.
Well, perhaps a sequel podcast when you guys have a press release around AI and HPC infrastructure. Would love to hear more about it and excited to see those developments. Mr. Gupta, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you have a good day and best of luck with the launch.
Thanks a lot, Colin. It's been a pleasure connecting with you, and thanks very much for this.